Two wrecks lie only 240 yards apart off North Carolina. One is the freighter Bluefields. The other is the German submarine U-576 that attacked it in 1942. Both sank within minutes of each other and then vanished into darkness for more than 70 years. NOAA finally found them with sonar in 2014. But that was only one scene in a much larger graveyard. So why does this one stretch of American coast keep taking ships from so many different centuries? Stay with me, and by the end, you will see why the answer is bigger than war, weather, or bad luck alone. If you look at the Outer Banks on a map, the first thing you notice is how exposed they are. These islands sit like a thin line of sand out in the Atlantic. In many places, they feel less like solid land and more like a temporary deal with the sea. That matters more than it seems. The Outer Banks are barrier islands, which means they are built by waves, wind, tides, and storms. They move, they reshape, and they never stay fully still. Cape Hatteras pushes farther into the ocean than much of the east coast nearby. That makes it a landmark. It also makes it a trap. This coast is beautiful in daylight, long beaches, open sky, rolling surf. But under that beauty is a place shaped by motion, not stability. USGS describes Cape Hatteras as part of a coastal system in constant flux. Sand moves. Storms cut through dunes. Water can rearrange the islands in hours. That is not poetic language. That is geology. And right off the cape sits Diamond Shoals. It is a large, shifting sand deposit that extends out from Cape Hatteras and creates real navigational hazards. That detail alone explains a lot. Picture a captain sailing before radar, before satellite maps, before modern engines. You see open water. The weather looks manageable. Then your hull meets a hidden bar of sand that was not there last season or not where you thought it was. That is how a coastline becomes a legend. Not through one disaster, but through repetition. The same mistake, the same storm, the same false sense of safety. People have been losing ships here for centuries. The estimate most often repeated is more than 5,000 vessels across these waters. Even if the exact number remains debated, the scale is not. That is why the name stuck. The graveyard of the Atlantic. It sounds dramatic until you realize it may still be too mild. The strange part is that this is not one kind of graveyard. It is not a battlefield alone. It is not a storm zone alone. It is not even one era. It is layers, colonial ships, passenger steamers, Civil War vessels, World War submarines, cargo ships, training craft, civilian liners, fishing boats. More than one America is down there. And because the sea does not sort history into neat shelves, everything ends up close together. A wreck from war can rest not far from a wreck caused by fog, sand, or human error. The ocean keeps no clean timeline. That is part of what makes this coastline so hard to understand at first. You want one explanation, one villain, one neat answer. But the truth is messier. Yes, storms matter here. USGS says the islands change slowly every day and then suddenly during major weather. Hurricanes can tear openings through the land. Nor'easters can linger for days and reshape beaches and dunes in ways a quick storm cannot. Yes, the seabed matters. Diamond Shoals is not fixed. It shifts. That means danger itself moves. And yes, human choices matter too. Routes, schedules, wartime decisions, poor visibility, overconfidence, and old charts all leave their mark. The graveyard is not just nature acting alone. It is nature meeting us halfway. If you were standing on these islands 100 years ago, you would not see most of that process. You would only see the result: broken hulls, survivors, or no survivors at all. For people on shore, the ocean must have felt both close and unknowable. You could hear it every night, but what it took, it often kept. That is where this story starts to deepen. Because the graveyard of the Atlantic is not only about loss, it is also about delay. Ships vanished here long before the technology existed to find them again. For generations, a wreck might survive only as a report, a rumor, or a line in a logbook. A ship sailed, weather changed, flares were seen. Then silence. Maybe wreckage washed ashore later, maybe it did not. So for a long time, the graveyard was known more by memory than by proof. People knew what this coast did. They just could not see the full record lying on the seafloor. That has changed. Slowly, methodically, sonar by sonar pass. NOAA and its partners have spent years mapping, documenting, and protecting sites off North Carolina. This is not treasure hunting. It is careful archaeology and marine science. That difference matters. Treasure hunters ask what can be removed. Archaeologists ask what can be learned. And in a place like this, the second question is far more powerful. The work has revealed a coastline where history is still physically present. Not imagined, not exaggerated. Present. Take the USS Monitor. Most people know it from the Civil War and from its famous fight with CSS Virginia. That battle helped prove that armored steam-powered warships had changed naval warfare for good. But the Monitor did not survive long after becoming famous. It sank off Cape Hatteras in 1862. More than a century later, its wreck became the nation's first national marine sanctuary when NOAA designated the site in 1975. Think about what that means. The first national marine sanctuary in the United States began here, not in a coral paradise, not in a tropical postcard scene, but around a wreck in rough Atlantic water. That tells you how important this coast is. The Monitor is one chapter. Then the story widens again. NOAA researchers have also documented wrecks like the USS Tarpon and the passenger liner Proteus. Tarpon fought in the Pacific during World War II, was later decommissioned, and then sank under tow off Cape Hatteras in 1956 before it could be scrapped. Proteus tells a different kind of story. It was not a warship at all. It was a passenger liner. In 1918, during wartime blackout conditions, it collided with another vessel after both ships had gone dark. That one detail says so much about this coastline. Even the effort to survive one threat could open the door to another. Lights off to avoid submarines, collision in the dark. By now, you can feel the pattern. Nothing here is ever just one thing. One choice solves one danger and deepens another. And then we reach 1942. This is where the graveyard of the Atlantic becomes even more unsettling, because now the coast is not only fighting wind, currents, and sand, it is part of a war. The Battle of the Atlantic is often pictured far to the north. Cold seas, distant convoys, gray horizons. But that image hides something important. The war came to America's coast, not in theory, not in a small symbolic way. In burning ships, broken routes, and sinking steel. German U-boats hunted merchant traffic off the east coast during Operation Drumbeat. North Carolina was one of the hardest hit places. The danger was so concentrated here that people gave parts of the coast another name, Torpedo Junction. Imagine living on shore then. Night falls, the horizon glows. Somewhere out there a tanker is burning. That really happened. And it happened close enough to land that coastal residents could see the light. There's something eerie about that image. Not because it is supernatural, because it is ordinary people watching global war play out just beyond the beach. And even then, the coast itself was still part of the threat. Submarines attacked. But the same waters also carried shifting sand, foul weather, and poor visibility. Nature did not pause for war. That is why the graveyard of the Atlantic cannot be told as one simple war story. War made the losses sharper. Geography made them possible. One convoy in particular helps bring that home. On July 15th, 1942, convoy KS-520 was traveling from Norfolk toward Key West. 19 merchant ships were under escort. Off Cape Hatteras, the German submarine U-576 attacked. It sank the Nicaraguan-flagged freighter Bluefields and damaged 2 other ships. But the attack did not end the way the submarine crew hoped. American aircraft and armed ships hit back. U-576 was bombed and fired on. Within minutes, both Bluefields and U-576 were gone. Then the sea closed over them, and that could have been the end of the story. For decades, people knew the event from wartime records. They knew the attack happened. They knew both vessels were lost. But the underwater scene itself remained missing. That missing piece is important. Records tell you what should have happened. A wreck tells you what did happen. Those are not always the same thing. So the question lingered for more than 70 years. Where exactly did they go down? And were they anywhere near each other after the battle ended? That question pulled modern science into an old war. NOAA and its partners began surveying areas off North Carolina linked to World War II losses. Archival research narrowed the search. Technology did the rest. High-resolution sonar can read shape from darkness. It does not need sunlight. It does not need a clear sea. It sends sound down and listens for the return. That alone feels almost magical until you remember it is physics. Sound travels well underwater. So if you cannot see the seafloor directly, you map it with echoes. Research ships can tow sonar. Underwater vehicles can carry it. Remotely operated vehicles can later go down for closer inspection. What was once invisible can now be outlined, then examined, then identified. In 2014, that process paid off. NOAA researchers located 2 significant wrecks about 30 miles off North Carolina. The site sat in the waters people had feared for generations. And there they were, Bluefields and U-576, less than 240 yards apart. Pause on that distance for a second. Not miles, not over the horizon, less than the length of 3 football fields. That is what makes the discovery hit so hard. These were not random losses in the same region. This was a battle frozen in place. The submarine that attacked. The freighter it sank. Both still resting near each other after all that time. The hunter and the target still sharing the same patch of seabed. You can read that fact in one line and miss the force of it. So picture it instead. 700 feet down, there's no sunlight. There's pressure, cold, and silence. Steel sits where fire once ruled. A battle that lasted minutes becomes a still life that lasts generations. And no one saw that exact scene for more than 70 years. This is the point where many stories would lean into myth. They would talk about curses, fate, revenge, or the sea as if it had a mind. But the real truth is stronger because it does not need any of that. Real places create real patterns. Cape Hatteras did not become a graveyard by rumor alone. It earned the name through conditions that keep repeating. The U-576 and Bluefield's discovery proved something bigger than one wartime event. It showed that this coast still holds physical evidence of stories we thought were already complete. Not complete in memory, not complete in history books, complete in matter. And the sea had been holding that evidence in reach the whole time. NOAA called the discovery a rare window into a World War II battlefield. That is exactly right. Because the seabed here is not just debris, it is context. Where the vessels rest matters. Their orientation matters. Their damage matters. The spacing matters. Every detail helps historians and archaeologists test what written records say. This is where the story turns from fascinating to emotional. Because U-576 is not simply a wreck. It is also a war grave for its crew. Bluefields, by contrast, did not lose lives in the sinking. The crew got off safely. That difference is part of the site's moral weight. You have one wreck tied to survival, another tied to death. One side escaped, the other never came home. So NOAA's work around the site has been careful and non-intrusive. The goal is documentation, not disturbance. That restraint matters. Modern technology can reach places people once could not. But reach is not the same as permission. Some sites demand distance even when we can finally touch them with cameras and sonar. And if that 2014 discovery feels like the end of the mystery, here is the part that pulls you back in. It was not even the strangest part. Because the battle site is only one pair of wrecks in a much larger underwater field. The discovery did not close the book on the graveyard of the Atlantic. It showed how many pages remain unread. That is the mid-story shift. For decades, people imagined the graveyard as a broad idea. Then sonar began turning the idea into a map. And maps can be more unsettling than legends. A legend says many ships were lost. A map shows where some of them still are. It turns a mood into coordinates. NOAA's work off North Carolina has done exactly that. Not all at once, not with one giant sweep, with repeated surveys, visual records, biological studies, and site documentation. The result is a coastline that keeps becoming more crowded the more carefully we look at it. And here's a twist you might not expect. These wrecks are not only historical sites. Many have become living reefs. On a sandy seafloor, hard structure is valuable. A wreck gives marine life surfaces to attach to and spaces to hide. Over time, a ship built for cargo or war becomes habitat. NOAA research on shipwrecks, artificial reefs, and rocky reefs across the southeastern United States shows that these structures support diverse fish communities. They can host high abundances of reef fish. They can also support top predators. That means the graveyard is not just a museum. It is an ecosystem. You can descend onto a wreck and find a war story. You can also find fish moving through it like it has always belonged there. Both are true at once. At the USS Tarpon, NOAA biologists carried out fish counts and wildlife studies. Sand tiger sharks have been seen over that wreck. Schools of fish gather around steel that was never meant to be a reef. That image stays with you. A submarine that once hunted vessels across the Pacific now serves as shelter for marine life off North Carolina. Human purpose ends. Ocean purpose begins. Proteus tells the same story in a different way. A passenger liner once built for comfort now rests as an underwater refuge. Time strips away our reasons for building things, but the material remains useful to life. This is one reason the graveyard of the Atlantic feels so layered. Nothing stays what it was. A ship becomes a wreck becomes habitat, a disaster becomes data, a battlefield becomes a place of remembrance. And still, the questions keep coming. How many sites remain unfound? How many stories survive only in paperwork? How many wrecks are eroding faster than we can document them? Those are not abstract concerns. Salt water is patient, but it is not gentle. Steel corrodes, wood collapses, storms move sand. A wreck can be exposed one season and buried the next. So there is urgency in this work, not panic. Urgency. That is why protection matters too. Wrecks linked to the Monitor Sanctuary expansion proposal and related NOAA work are not just interesting dive spots. They are historic sites. Some are graves, some are both. And this brings us back to the coastline itself. Why here? Why so many? Why this place over and over again? The first answer is shape. The Outer Banks jut into the Atlantic. Ships moving along the coast had strong reasons to pass near them. The second answer is motion. Barrier islands move. Shoals move. Sandbars do not honor yesterday's chart. The third answer is weather. USGS notes that storms can rework these islands quickly. Hurricanes and northeasters bring waves, surge, and long periods of stress. The coast is never fully settled. And the fourth answer is human traffic. If a dangerous place also sits near important routes, losses accumulate. The graveyard grew because risk and traffic kept meeting in the same waters. That combination is what makes the story feel almost designed, even though it is not. It is a geography machine. It keeps producing danger from the same ingredients: warm and cold waters, shifting sand, exposed cape, repeated storms, heavy shipping, wartime pressure. Put those together long enough, and you do not get a few famous wrecks. You get an archive. What NOAA has done is begin reading that archive more clearly. The work is not glamorous in the Hollywood sense. It is patient. Survey lines, scan after scan, review after review. Then a shape appears where the seafloor should have been empty. That moment must be electric, not because treasure is waiting, because history suddenly gains edges. You go from a sentence in a wartime report to a real object on the seabed, from maybe to there, from lost to location, and location changes memory. It lets museums teach with confidence. It lets researchers compare records with physical evidence. It lets families, communities, and nations know where part of the past still rests. That last point can be easy to miss. We talk about wrecks as if they are things, but each one was also a voyage, a crew, a set of expectations, a departure that was supposed to end somewhere else. Some were heading home, some were carrying fuel, some were carrying passengers, some were part of war, some were just unlucky. So when NOAA finds a site like U-576 and Bluefields, it is not only a technical success, it is a human one. It gives form back to an event that had been almost all paper. And in a graveyard like this, there are many such events. That is why even famous wrecks do not tell the whole story. The Monitor may be the best-known historic site in these waters, but it is only one voice in a crowded field. Tarpon and Proteus add 2 more. Bluefields and U-576 add 2 more. Countless others remain as names, likely positions, partial scans, or future targets. There is something humbling in that. We live in an age that likes complete maps, but the seafloor still resists us. It keeps secrets, not because they are mystical, but because depth, sediment, current, and scale are enough. A place can be close to shore and still feel remote. That may be one of the biggest surprises of this whole story. The U-576 and Bluefields wrecks were only about 30 miles offshore. That sounds near. On land, it is a simple drive. At sea, in deep water and shifting conditions, it is another world. That gap between near and unreachable is part of the power here. These ships were not lost on the far side of the planet. They were lost near home in water that still hid them for decades. And that should make us rethink what coastlines are. A beach feels like an edge. In truth, it is an entrance. Most of what matters beyond it lies out of sight. The graveyard of the Atlantic proves that hidden space can hold centuries at once. It also proves something else. Science does not make the world less mysterious. It often makes the mystery sharper. Before sonar, you could say the graveyard was mostly legend. After sonar, you learn that the legend was real and still incomplete. That is a deeper kind of wonder. You can see the same thing in how NOAA studies these wrecks now. Archaeologists document structure and condition. Biologists count fish and study habitat use. Mapping teams build the seafloor image. Different kinds of truth meet at one site. History asks, who sailed here? Ecology asks, who lives here now? Geology asks why this coast keeps changing. Together, they make the place feel larger, not smaller. And maybe that is the most explore-verse part of this story. The awe comes from reality. No embellishment needed. A submarine and its target really did lie 240 yards apart for more than 70 years. A Civil War ironclad really did help create the first national marine sanctuary. A passenger liner and a war-trained submarine really do rest in the same regional graveyard. Sandbars really do shift enough to change fate. Even the museum on shore reflects that long arc. In Hatteras, the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum exists because these waters hold too much history to leave unspoken. It is a land-based answer to an offshore archive. You can walk through exhibits, you can see recovered objects, you can connect names and dates, but even then, the deeper record stays out beyond the beach in cold water and low light. That tension is powerful. We want to bring the past home, yet much of it remains where it fell. Maybe that is appropriate. Maybe some history should stay in the place that shaped it, not untouched in every case, but respected. This is especially true when graves are involved. The ocean floor is not only an evidence field. At some sites, it is a resting place. That does not weaken the science. It strengthens the responsibility around it. And there's another quiet layer here. The same wrecks that tell us about loss are now helping life persist. Fish gather. Predators cruise by. Structure creates shelter. So the graveyard is not dead space, it is active. Ecologically active. Historically active. Emotionally active. That makes the place harder to categorize and more unforgettable. It is easy to imagine the sea erasing everything. But off North Carolina, the sea has also preserved things. Not perfectly, not forever, but long enough for us to return with better tools and better questions. That may be why this story lands so strongly now. We are not the first generation to fear these waters. We are simply the first with a real chance to read them in detail. And every new scan changes the balance between what is guessed and what is known. Still, there is a limit. No one should pretend that all mysteries here are close to solved. Even with modern mapping, there are too many losses, too much area, and too much change. Some wrecks are likely buried. Some may be broken beyond easy recognition. Some may sit in records with locations too vague for quick discovery. Some may still wait in places no one has surveyed closely enough. So the graveyard remains active in another sense. It keeps asking for patience. And patience is exactly what this science uses. That may be the best lesson in the whole story. Big discoveries often arrive through repetition, not drama. You search the right place, then you search again. Then one afternoon, an echo comes back wrong. A shape appears. A second shape appears nearby, and suddenly history is not missing anymore. When that happened with Bluefields and U-576, it gave the graveyard of the Atlantic one of its clearest symbols. Not because the site is the oldest or the largest or the deepest, because it is legible. You can understand the human moment: attack, return fire, sinking, silence, rest. That clarity helps us grasp the larger graveyard too. Multiply that by centuries. Change the vessel type, change the weather, change the cause, but keep the same coast? That is how you get a place where thousands of ships are remembered and many are still being found. And as strange as it sounds, the more we learn, the more personal it becomes. You stop thinking only about ships. You think about watch shifts. Letters never delivered, families waiting. Cargo that mattered, orders followed. Mistakes made in fog, crews trying to round a cape before weather closed in. You think about how many people saw this coastline as the last hard part of a voyage, only to find out it was the hardest part of all. That is why this story should not be told as a list of wrecks. It should be told as a living relationship between land, sea, and memory. The land is narrow and exposed. The sea is restless. Memory arrives late, then all at once. NOAA's drones, sonar, and survey teams are part of that late arrival. They are not discovering a myth. They are catching up to a truth the coast has been holding for centuries. And the truth is this: the graveyard of the Atlantic is not famous because people like dark names. It is famous because a real place, with real physical forces, kept producing real tragedy on a massive scale. But that is not where the story ends. Because now the same place is producing knowledge. It is teaching marine ecology. It is refining military history. It is revealing how coastlines shape human movement. It is showing how technology can restore detail to events once blurred by time. In other words, the graveyard is still giving things back. Not ships, not lives, but understanding. That may be the most honest kind of recovery the ocean allows. So when you hear that NOAA found two wrecks 240 yards apart, do not treat it as a cool fact and move on. Hear what it really says. It says this coast still holds conversations between centuries. It says war can sleep beside trade. It says disaster can become habitat. It says a place once feared for taking ships can now help explain them. And it says we are still early in this process. There are more wrecks to map, more sites to protect, more histories to test against the seafloor, more moments waiting in darkness for the first clear image. That is why the graveyard of the Atlantic remains so gripping. Not because it is unexplained, but because it is only partly explained. The causes are real, the scale is real, the unfinished work is real too. You can stand on the beach at Hatteras today and see sunlight on waves. You would never guess how much lies below, but that hidden weight is there. Steel, wood, cargo, anchors, engines, guns, plates, hull ribs, names. And somewhere among them, whole chapters of the American coast still waiting for one more sonar pass. That leaves us with a bigger thought. Maybe the most mysterious places are not the ones beyond human reach. Maybe they are the ones we have lived beside for centuries without fully seeing. This coastline has been charted, sailed, fought over, and feared. Yet it still surprises us. Not with fantasy, with evidence. And maybe that is the best kind of wonder there is, the kind that survives contact with the facts, the kind that gets stronger when the map sharpens. So the next time you hear the phrase graveyard of the Atlantic, do not picture a spooky label from old sailor lore. Picture a real moving coastline. Picture diamond shoals shifting under dark water. Picture a freighter and a submarine resting close enough to measure with your eye on a sonar screen. Picture sharks circling wrecks that once carried war. Then picture the thousands of other voyages tied to this same edge of America, some documented, some still missing, all part of one long conversation between human ambition and a coast that never stopped changing. If one detail from this story hit you hardest, I would love to know which one. Was it the two wrecks lying only 240 yards apart, the idea of thousands of ships lost off one coast, or the fact that many of these wrecks are now living reefs? Tell me that in one sentence in the comments. And if you want more real places that feel almost impossible until you see the evidence, subscribe to Exploreverse and turn on notifications. There is a lot more of this world left to uncover.